Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. There's a word in Pali called sankhara that many of you know. It's the fourth of the five aggregates of clinging, the focal points of identity. And it's often translated as formation. And its quintessential quality is intention. And it's how we create Kamma. It's how we create, how we imbue an action or a life with meaning and relevance and potency. And in Sanskrit, the word sankhara also could mean ritual, a sacred form. And I think that's a beautiful resonance when we chant like this, when we frame our lives or a talk or an action with ritual, with a sort of sacred sankhara, with a form. It sanctifies. It's I think I read recently about someone who left their shoe in the middle of an art exhibit just to see what would happen. And you see people sort of gathering around and looking at the shoe, just trying to figure out what the meaning is. And so often, this is what art is you're framing something so, something you would usually pass right by that seems so mundane or simple. But when you frame it, when you remember what a blessing this life can be, what beauty hides pregnant right below the surface of our day-to-day existence if we have mindfulness, care, composure, attention, then it becomes sacred. And so people come to this tradition and they see our forms, the ritual, and it's important to see that what we're doing is we're learning to frame these moments, to make them stick, to steer these disparate elements of a life into one trajectory towards awakening, towards sanctification. And that comes with the singing, the chanting, the bowing, all these technologies of the heart. And it's the beautiful thing in that sankhara can also just mean our usual habit patterns, our traditional ways we move through the world, our personality patterns, these constellations of intention and feeling and memory. But it can mean something sacred too. And what that means is that a simple life, mundane existence, can become super mundane, can become transcendent, and a path to awakening if we only frame it with correct intention. The Buddha spoke about three kinds of Kamma. There's mental Kamma, verbal Kamma, and bodily Kamma. And of these three, he said mental Kamma was the most potent. The mind precedes all things are mind-made. And act or speak with a wholesome mind, and happiness will follow you like a shadow that never leaves. These are the first two Dhammapada verses. The first is, all things are mind-made, mind is the forerunner. Act or speak with a defiled mind, and suffering will follow like the wheel of an ox cart. And you think of the images those two different similes, like so many of the Buddha's images, there's such depth where the wheel of an ox cart is heavy, it's visible, it digs a rut. And a shadow is light. It's almost invisible if you're not looking for it. And so much of the path is like that. We cling to our suffering because it's all we know, because it orients us, because it's heavy and visible. Ajahn Amaro once had a nimitta, a dream, with Master Hua, one of the great masters of the last century. And Master Hua said, "Bright, loud, and mobile is the false. Subtle and indistinct is the true." Bright, loud, and mobile is the false. Subtle and indistinct is the true. And often when people meditate on the breath, they'll receive something called a light nimitta. And people miss it because they're looking for kind of a ball of light. But often what it is instead is just a brightening of the whole mental space, of the whole visual field. And you can miss it because you're looking for something singular, confined, but it's your entire quality of experience. And similarly, people miss the effect this path has on their lives because often what it is you begin to practice, and 1 or 2 or 3 years down the road, you realize, you look up, and you realize that the whole quality of your mind and heart are brighter. It's not necessarily one single thing. Maybe your life looks almost the same as it did before, with the same relationship, the same job, but at the same time, everything is shifted. I often talk about, we so often measure our life on an XY axis of gain and loss. But when we begin to practice, it's as if we open up this whole new Z axis, and you find experience deepening and widening and broadening. And this is how, if we bring transcendent Kamma, intention, to a life, then it transforms it utterly. And people often ask, okay, if there's no self, what carries Kamma? And this is kind of getting it backwards. It's thinking of Kamma in terms of a self, a nucleus of identity travels, and Kamma happens to it. But in Buddhism, it's rather the other way around. Kamma is continuity of habit and intention and craving. And one of those habit patterns is the feeling of self. And I think one of the best similes is of a river, where a river, you can usually identify its banks, its curves, but the water passing down it is always different. And yet you can spot over the course of days or years becoming familiar with it, oh, there's an eddy. These are the habit patterns. There's an eddy, there's a whirlpool over there. Here's where the water becomes rough. Here's where it's smooth. Here's where it reflects the sky. And similarly, Heraclitus said we never step into the same river twice, but I think the Buddha would say we are never the same river twice. We are these flows of habit and intention. This is Kamma. And it's true over the course of years. The whole course of that river can change. It can silt up. The banks can become wide or shift. But, and I think this actually merges well with an analogy Ajahn Sucitto gives, where he says that the mind is like a river carrying all these objects, and we don't need to clear away all the objects. We just need to clear away enough of the objects that we can see the water underneath. And that's good, because most of us have girlfriends and boyfriends and jobs floating along that river, and it's pretty crowded, and family and old memories and grudges. But all we have to do is clear away enough that we can see the clear, bright intention running underneath, and understand that that is the quintessential ingredient. And the Buddha really singled out the teaching of Kamma as singular and significant. He called his teaching a Kammavadi, a teaching of Kamma, of action. And the Buddha said that every moment is composed of several different conditions. He framed this in terms of what's called idapachayata, this, that conditionality. So when this is, that is. When this isn't, that isn't. When this arises, that arises. When this ceases, that ceases. And what that means, it sounds very esoteric and cryptic, but what it means is the present moment is composed of the results of past intention, past kamma. We call it vipaka, or the fruit of past kamma. And the results of present intention. So what it means is we are influenced by our past. Things affect us that we've done, our habits come to play. But how that manifests in the heart right now is also conditioned by our intention and how we hold it in this moment. And that's an unbelievably hopeful teaching. Because it means not only can we affect our future, we can change how we are in this world. We can give up greed, hatred, delusion. We can purify the heart. And it also means that the echoes of a past action, long ago done, or more recently, how we encounter those echoes depends on what we're listening for and how we're listening. The Buddha said that a negative action manifesting, the fruit of a negative action manifesting in the present moment, if it manifests in a small, constricted heart, it can manifest, it's like salt, a pinch of salt dropped into a glass of water, and it changes the whole taste of the water. But when the same negative kamma manifests in a wide, loving, broad mind, then it barely changes. It can almost manifest not at all, like a pinch of salt dropped into the Ganges River. And what this means is that our past kamma, the things we've done, if our minds are small and constricted, then they can echo loudly, they can result in large consequences. But if our minds are broad and loving, then often you'll find you've done something, you've slipped in your speech a little, said something slightly unbeautiful, and there's a real sense of bruising and of remorse. But often that's it. That's the whole of it. That echo passes and it's gone, and you'll find as you practice that those echoes stick around less and less, a bit like a drop of water rolling off of a lotus leaf. And that's hugely heartening because it means we're not victim of our old kamma. We can affect how it manifests now. And that's good news because we're not working through all of our old kamma. We've got a lot of it. It's okay. And what's so interesting is that teaching exists in tandem alongside the fact that as we practice, as the heart becomes more and more pure, the smallest deviations from the Dhammic route through a moment, the smallest manifestations of greed or impatience or delusion, they echo more. We feel them much more sharply. There's a teaching which I've quoted before called the thief of a scent, where a monk is walking through a forest and he picks up a flower and he smells it, and a deva, an angel, comes down and says, "Why are you stealing the scent of that flower?" And the bhikkhu says, "Why are you admonishing me? There's people doing far worse things out there." And the deva responds, "Why would I bother with one who is shameless, like a dirty nursing cloth, a diaper? You are a clean cloth. For one intent on purity, a hair's breadth worth of evil seems as big as a cloud. And the Buddha, or the bhikkhu asks for forgiveness. He says, "You're right." And then he says, "If I ever slip again, please admonish me." And the deva says, "I'm not your servant. You can practice yourself, thank you." And he says, "Sorry." It's one of those little details in the suttas that's just hilarious, but it's there. And we were talking to there's a bunch of monks on Vashon. They make coffee and beard oil, which we do not, but they also are really wonderful. And we talked to one named Father Nicodemus, and he said, as you practice, the smallest deviations feel like a sin. Maybe a saint forgets to pass the salt, and it just sticks in his heart like, I forgot to pass the salt. But for him, that's where his practice is remembering that. And that has to be held correctly. Obviously, you don't want to become overly self-critical or perfectionist. Obviously, we all forget to pass the salt, and smelling flowers is okay for most people. But what it does mean is over time, our sensitivity to those deviations becomes so beautifully vivid. And it's a gift, because if we were forced to operate at that level of refinement right off the bat, it would be too much. But this path is a spiral staircase, and as you refine, those small blemishes stick. And more, the language of right and wrong becomes less relevant, and that of beautiful and unbeautiful become very relevant. And so often, you'll just find that what sticks is maybe having been a little impatient in a conversation, having jumped in a little too quickly, having reacted. And to know that this is a sign that the cloth below the brightness of the mind is becoming more luminous, that those mars become more distinct. And that somehow this sensitivity to deviations from the path become viscerally apparent, even as the actual echoes of that Kamma can become so much less. Even as we're cultivating a broad mind, it's also a mind very sensitive to these things. And often then the question arises, so how do we know what is wholesome Kamma, kusala? And many of you know the term kusala comes from the word kusa grass, and it's a sharp type of grass that if you tried to grab it incorrectly, it would cut the hand. So the Buddha's word for skillfulness, kusala, it's a skill. We develop a skill in operating beautifully in this world. And so then learning what is kusala. And so often it's actually not acting. So often our impulse is to act from the place of doubt or anger. And I think one beautiful way of looking at the ordering of the Four Noble Truths, acknowledging suffering, seeing its cause, craving, and letting go of craving, feeling and realizing the cessation of suffering, nibbana, peace. Even a momentary, for the sake of this conversation, even a momentary feeling of peace, and then cultivating the path. What it means, I think one way of thinking about it in this context is when we're overcome with doubt or anxiety or a need to act, we're still caught in the first and second noble truth, and that's when your duty is to stand under dukkha. Understand, you need to stand under it and just feel how it feels in the heart, and don't act from that place. That's your job in that situation, is to not act from there. And then when the fires have died down, when your impulse to jump into the conversation and be a part of something you feel like you're missing out on, when your almost irresistible impulse to respond to something you consider unjust or to eat the whole thing of cake, whatever it is, when it has faded, and you find yourself standing in that clarity and coolness of the Third Noble Truth, that's when the fourth noble truth of the path emerges. That's when you can see clearly. So often right intention and cultivating a wholesome approach to Kamma is just learning to not act from a place of craving and anxiety or anger, from those waves of delusion, and holding still enough that we can wait until a wider vista opens on the other side of the first and second noble truth, and we see our route forward. And that's very comforting when you're in the midst of doubt or anger, just to know your job is as simple as not acting from that very often. The other metric I like to bring up is the nimitta, the sign of sila, is samadhi. And that means the sign of virtue is unification of mind. And how I take that is when you have a question, when you're debating whether to do something or not, whether to keep using your friend's Netflix password or not, those little things, and you find yourself circling around it, that in itself is your answer. The sign of good virtue is the ability to put something down. So even if there's another answer to that you could think of, the fact that not putting it down is making your mind unable to settle is its own answer. Put it down. That's virtue. And that's such a simple metric. And often it's so useful because when the seas are rough, you want to look out to the horizon and find the right landmark. You want to see as far as you can. When things are especially stormy in a relationship or a job, the impulse is to try to get a picture of the whole landscape and find the perfect decision. But often in those moments when the waves are highest, your only real decision is to steer into the next wave so you don't capsize. And that means counterintuitively coming as intimately right to the space of the heart as you can and feeling from there what makes you feel strong, what makes you feel weak, what makes your body feel integrated, and what makes you disintegrate, what makes you kind of slouch, what makes the mind unable to settle, what makes it able to settle. That is your compass. And the Buddha talked about 4 kinds of Kamma: bright, dark. So bright leading to bright result, that's wholesome, skillful action leading to happiness, to punya. Dark leading to dark result. And then both bright and dark, a nice mix, which is where most of us fall. And then neither bright nor dark. And that last one is the key. Because the neither bright nor dark Kamma is Kamma towards the ending of Kamma. That's the Kamma of the Noble Eightfold Path. And that list is really important because what it means is you look out and you see yourself and all beings caught in these waves of circumstance and echoes of action and wholesome and unwholesome. And to realize that in the Buddhist teaching, if you bring correct intention, yoniso manasikara, appropriate attention, viewing everything as through the lens of the Four Noble Truths, cultivating the path, then every kind of action can be transmuted, every kind of fruit of an action, every kind of echo can be transmuted into the path. Every moment can become a stepping stone on the path, can be turned into that neither bright nor dark Kamma. You read the biographies of the great masters, and often their lives are filled with difficulty and challenge. But because they used each of those in service of cultivating patience and love and compassion, then they became stepping stones. One of the most foundational axioms of cognitive behavioral therapy is a stressor faced voluntarily is curative. A stressor faced involuntarily increases anxiety. So we got a lot of stressors. We might as well face them voluntarily. And that's what the Four Noble Truths allows us to do. If you really look at the difficulties that come your way as the things that don't go the way you wish them to, as chances to practice. Because if we didn't have difficulty, what motivation would there be to separate out the knowing element of the heart from the conditions of the world? What motivation would we have or ability to cultivate love and compassion? Longpo Liam says there are no obstacles, only worthy adversaries. Han Shan, a famous Zen master, said, after a time, the whole path becomes pleasant. When things are pleasant, they're pleasant. And when they're painful, it's a chance to use your Dharma strength, which is pleasant. I really like that. And I've never seen a limit to how far that approach can be taken. That if you're intent on practicing, then you really can, there's the story of one of the Dalai Lama's disciples who was stuck in Chinese prison for 20 years. And when he emerged, he said, the one thing I was afraid of is that I'd lose compassion for my captors, but he didn't. And what would it mean to really encounter every moment, every difficulty as a chance to broaden your heart as a path towards awakening? This is changing every moment into neither bright nor dark Kamma. And what else is interesting in that list of 4 is that there's no neutral Kamma. There's no neutral Kamma. There's bright, dark, both bright and dark, and karma of the path. And what that means is every moment is either resurrection or death. Every moment, in a Christian terminology, every moment is either a chance to operate from knowledge or ignorance. Every moment of, no matter how mundane, whether it's, an example I often use is these small chances we have to make our life beautiful. When you take out your partner's laundry from the dryer, do you just put it in the basket or do you fold it? I keep using that example, and then I actually have to do it every time I take someone's laundry out, because I know I've said it so many times in Dharma talks. So, but yeah, you're welcome. But it's a good thing. And Venerable Thupten Chodron says that when she acts, she tries to act in every action she tries to incline the mind towards keeping the 5 precepts. And what that means is not just keeping them at their bare minimum, not just kind of brushing the ant off of your leg in a sort of haphazard way, but how can you incline the mind towards that ethos into the future? And that means gently taking the ant off your leg, placing it on a bush outside, maybe giving it a little bit of metta on the way out. It means putting away the dishes carefully and quietly. It means folding the laundry. It means all these little ways we can add that small extra intention into a normal life to make it transcendent and to change it from normal, mundane, middle-class, Kamma existence, whatever you want to call it, into the path. And maybe the final thing to speak about here is forgiveness. We look back on a life and see just all the ways that we've deviated from a path that we would wish we'd taken. And the self-recrimination, it's one of the saddest parts actually about being a monk, is getting to lead retreats and hear people speak about their internal experience in meditation again and again. And people are so good and so kind and so brutal to themselves consistently here. And when someone tried to explain to the Dalai Lama about what sort of self-hatred in Westerners was like, it took them quite a while to explain exactly what they meant, and then he actually began to cry. And just the intensity with which people in the modern age feel this. And to know, to trust in the healing power of this path of precepts. Often when people begin to encounter samadhi for the first time or begin to practice, there will really be a period of kind of grieving for the past rips in our sila. And that's okay. But the Buddha also said in the Samyutta, in one discourse in the Samyutta Nikaya, called the conch blower, he said, when one sees a bad action, one thinks, that was not good, and I cannot undo what I have done. And instead of fixating on it, which can become cause for darker states in the future, one develops a mind imbued with metta, loving kindness, with compassion, with joy, and with equanimity. Just as a conch blower would make themselves heard in the four directions, even so, when the mind is liberated through love, through compassion, through sympathetic joy, through equanimity, then any limited kamma does not remain there. Any limited kamma does not remain there. This is the Ganges River. If you develop love, compassion, the broad mind, then those echoes fade. And to know that much of what our mind struggles against in any situation or vision of another, of ourself, of how the world is the sense of it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. Someone was quoting kind of one quote recently, expectations are pre-planned resentments, or expectations is a reservation for future resentment, which I also appreciated. And we all have this experience. This is the power of understanding conditionality, of wisdom, of a broad view, is when you understand how something manifests, when you learn why your boss is acting the way they are because of how their home life is right now, or what happened to them when they were a child. There's a sense, we've all had this experience, I think, of like, oh, of course they're like that right now. Or maybe you realize you're like very grumpy, and then suddenly you realize you haven't eaten yet. And it's that simple. Just as soon as you understand what's causing the moment to be the way it is, the heart grounds and releases, and a huge amount of the suffering just goes away. The heart is broad enough to hold everything if it has wisdom. And similarly, when you look back at who you were, back then, with that much wisdom and that much greed and that much hatred and that much delusion and that much kindness and the conditions that manifested then in your childhood and the experience as it was, that's what manifested in that moment. It wasn't skillful, perhaps, but those were the conditions. And self-forgiveness rests in a sense of understanding conditionality and respect for conditionality. Just understanding this was how it was at that time. And can you accept that and put it down and have compassion for yourself as you were? Longpo Viradhammo says, humility is a love of reality. Humility is love of reality. And I love that vision of Kamma, because what it means is you can forgive who you were as only knowing what you knew back then. And every beautiful intention and action you put into play here can be conditioned for future, can be a gift to a future self. There's a great Simpsons I've heard of where Homer drinks a bottle of vodka and a can of mayonnaise. And Marge says, "That's a bad idea, Homer." And he says, "Oh, that's future Homer's problem. I wouldn't want to be that guy." and so we want to avoid that. But this idea that every action you do right now is a gift to a future, and it echoes out. And it can be simple, it can be manifest in a daily existence. It can be as simple as keeping loving kindness in your heart through a normal job, through a relationship, or through more. But in the end, it's the path towards awakening. And I wish you all the best on that path.
Handamayandamaghataya sadhu karandaramase sadhu 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 anumodami.
So we have time for some questions or comments. People can raise your hand and we'll run a mic over to you. And if you're on Zoom, please feel free to raise your cartoon hand and our AV team can call on you. Noah.
Thank you for your talk today. I was interested when you talked about acting from a place of doubt and anger. What about not acting as a result of these feelings, like wholesome desire shut down by doubt or misplaced guilt?
No, thank you. Good point. Yeah, that's not good either. So I'd say if you, my sense is like there's no clear instruction for exactly when an action will be wholesome or unwholesome or inaction, for example. But my sense is as you practice, you really begin to feel it. And it's sort of, if you aren't acting and you just feel the kind of a wholesome impulse to keep, it just keeps coming up. And then I think you can begin to trust that. And it takes perhaps a few iterations of that same pattern. And just to start to recognize the voice of, quote unquote, Mara and the voice of, quote unquote, the Dhamma internally. And often Mara has kind of an oily voice, like a bit weaselly or afraid. And the voice of the Dhamma often, we're just personifying him for the sake of this question, but it's a very clear voice. And even if it's telling you to act right now, just you need to do something right now. And just to kind of get a feel for those two tones, I think. But yeah, that's certainly something that can happen to people, absolutely.
And we do have this bias towards action, both in the positive and the negative. And on the positive side of things, you see this when you start training in precepts, when you take on the idea, I'm not going to kill, I'm not going to steal, I'm not going to do sexual misconduct, I'm not going to lie. And those not doings, those abstentions are kind of harder to see, but it's definitely not the case that it requires less effort, especially if it's a new habit. Like if we've been lying our whole lives and have been living in families and cultures that say, oh, everybody lies, don't worry about it, then the will and intentions and repeated intentions that it takes to actually refrain from that, that's a lot of non-doing, and that's real, and it does have fruit. It becomes a habit itself. So yeah, respecting both sides of that equation, that doing and not doing are karma, our action, our habit, and will have an effect on how we experience things, both when we're trying to do good and when we're trying to refrain from that which is unhealthy for ourselves or others. So yeah, respect. I think a wholesome respect for this process of habit creation. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have someone on Zoom. Can they unmute? And Cheryl, maybe would it be possible to turn to... And we can come back to that person as well. Okay, the person on Zoom can unmute.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the beautiful talk. I just wanted to ask one question about when I'm looking at the messages on Discord and WhatsApp, and now you also mentioned about the relocation. And somehow I want to see it with the upekha, the situation with equanimity, that this you might find a good place to stay, both of you. But so far it looks like it's not happening, and the mind is not very happy, it's agitated, and try to fix it, try to do something about it, but somehow it's not possible to help you in some way. So just wondering, how are you dealing with it? What is your mind state in this midst of finding a place? And I know the youth and homelessness is the main one thing Buddha encouraged for monastics, but still, like for us as lay people, we want you to down, and maybe of course the monastery is not happening anytime soon. So how's your mind with it? For me, sometimes I feel like personally I can take this my own for myself if I have to deal with the situation, but if I see loved ones like you both and monastics or the family member going through this, mind is not in upekkha and equanimity is not there, just mind want to fix this. So please help any of us who are actually thinking about it a lot. Please, thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah, thank you, Vandana. So the question is just about how are we dealing with not having or looking for another place to stay, which might be more lasting, and we don't know. It might not be that long before we have a place to stay. We're looking at two different properties, and both of them seem hopeful in their own way. But just in the shorter term, the announcement that Ajahn Nisabho made that we might be looking for another place to stay for a shorter term period before we actually get land. I mean, just to acknowledge, we are so privileged. We are so privileged. And I would say, in terms of ranking the ways in which we're privileged, I'd say the best way that we're privileged is that we see value in simplicity and have been training in simplicity. And that's a privileged mind state to be able to, we don't actually need that much. We don't need that much. We eat one meal a day before noon. We can get that on alms, so we're not hungry. Largely speaking, it can be hungry in the afternoon sometimes, but over a period of time, we're not starving for sure. In terms of land, we've had these really simple huts, and we've been training in contentment with little. This is a monastic virtue. It's a Buddhist virtue, contentment with little, and praising contentment with little. There have been times when Ajahn Nisabho and I have months and months, if not the majority of some years, when we've just lived in tents or we've just lived in mosquito nets. And the privilege of that is that it has been by choice, and we've been living in safe communities. We've been living in safe forests where we can do that, and the only real danger is wild animals. That is a privilege, and right now it's not. Dave and Allison aren't kicking us out. It's just if we find a place, if someone has a situation which just seems perfect, then we can go there. So we're definitely not stressed about it. We have enough food. Our robes, these robes, they can serve as a tent. This thing is like 9 feet by 6 feet. Fold it in half and it's a sheet, or fold it another way, it's a tent. It's a sleeping bag. You can do so much with it, people. Living in a rectangle is awesome. I highly recommend it. So just grateful for this Buddhist cultural value of contentment with little. So
Ajahn Kovilo's great at contentment. It's sometimes we fast and we don't always have to shave if we're fasting because we don't have to go in for alms. And I learned that one of the reasons Ajahn Kovilo doesn't shave every day when we fast is because he's preserving the razors, which is really good. So, and no, Vandana, thank you for your concern, but we really are delighted with our situation, and it's beautiful at Dave and Allison's, and other things might or might not open up. But one thing to emphasize is the whole, we don't know how we feel about when land's going to actually, it's going to be an adventure when land comes on the radar. It took me 2 weeks to install a towel rack in my kuti. I'm sort of a bit concerned about actually having to build a monastery. But a really important thing is we're happy living, kind of with each other, with a very simple existence. The project of Clear Mountain is very much, in large part, our desire to provide a refuge for the lay community here and a wider community of monastics. It's really framed as a gift. There are places where we could go in Thailand and just live alone very simply right now if we wanted. So no, we have this, we feel like we're being swept along on very deep waters here. Something is manifesting, and I think everyone here feels that. That's pretty profound, and we're delighted to be part of that. I think one of our prayers each day is that we can remain worthy of being part of this, and keep our sila such that we can be. But yeah, we're just kind of along for the ride, and things have been wonderful so far. A lot of faith, and honestly, we have a lot of faith in the Dhamma and Devas. Like going to Pike Place when we got here with no one signed up to give food, and just having faith that we would get fed every day. For the last 4 years, we haven't gone hungry once at Pike Place. And the first day, 7 people offered food. And like, there's beautiful, beautiful things manifest in the world when you make yourself vulnerable. And it's a lot more fun to do that with everyone. So yeah, thank you, Vandana, and we're quite well, and just kind of looking forward to what happens.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
When we were on Tudong, Ajahn Kovilo had a much warmer robe sleeping bag than I did, and yeah, it's true.
That's because I brought an extra sleeping bag. I think you didn't even bring a sleeping bag. Yeah, that was a mistake. Yeah. I think I did offer, or at least I thought about offering. Yeah, but.
Thank you so much. This talk really lifted my heart. I've been thinking a lot about the difference between indifference and dispassion. And I hadn't heard the concept of neither bright nor dark Kamma, and I'm wondering how that might be related to dispassion. And if intention somehow is the big difference between the two.
Yeah, that's a great question. A few things. One is the traditional quality that gets conflated with indifference, or which people really need to parse out, is often upekkha, equanimity. And I think in that context, it's really useful. I love Bhante Analayo's translation of equipoise, because you think, like, first, equanimity is one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, upekkha, and it's sort of colored by all the love that surrounds those other 3. But also you think of the word poise, and like when a dancer is poised with stillness, like it's not indifferent, it's a moment of waiting for the next movement, which is fluid. And for me, that image is so helpful. And additionally, upekkha, literally the etymology means, ik means to look, and upa means to approach. So like, upekkha could be translated as looking closely. And I think that's so important, because that's the difference, is like a careful attention. And the analogy, or the example I often give, is when you're with family. It's such an important quality. And when I when I stay with my the full family, mom, dad, you're wonderful. But with my sister and others, like, so much of the job is upekkha, and not getting caught into this kind of maelstrom of sankharas flying this way and that, and old family dynamics. But I find that if I just have my intention not to get caught in those, but keep watching closely, within about 3 or 4 days, there'll usually be like 2 or 3 moments where there's a crack, and like I can really touch. I'll find myself like sitting across the table from my sister, and it's quiet, and we actually get to talk, about our hearts. And like, for me, that's the difference, is you're waiting, you're watching closely for the moment when the other 3 Brahma Viharas can manifest. And as to dark and bright, neither bright nor dark Kamma of the path. Majjhima Nikaya 117 talks about how every path factor becomes transcendent when three factors circle around it. Right view, where one knows this is right, this is wrong, and right mindfulness, wrong, right action, wrong action, right effort, so one makes an effort towards right action and towards refraining from wrong action, and right mindfulness, so keeping mindful of those. And he says those three factors circle around every view. And those three factors together, right effort, right mindfulness, and right view, compose yoniso manasikara, appropriate attention. So any moment you bring appropriate attention to is elevated to neither bright nor dark Kamma. It's elevated to transcendent path.
Yeah, very good, great question. Sussing out this difference between indifference and equanimity. And I think there's a Ajahn Chah quote about, when one's practicing equanimity, you want to have the equanimity of a monastic, not the equanimity of a water buffalo. And it's that the water buffalo equanimity, that's the indifference, that's just willfully blind, or it does come back to intention. And on the opposite end of things, there's sensitivity, the different types of sensitivity. You have the sensitivity of a connoisseur, and you've got the sensitiveness of a snowflake. And yeah, seeing which type of sensitivity and which type of equanimity or equipoise, as Bhante Nalio phrases it, which one we want to lean into. And yeah, it's great to be able to name these, to have them named differently, and to lean into the ones that we want to strengthen. So yeah, thank you. Maybe one more question?
Thank you so much for the talk and meditation. So I think I'm having a little difficulty with the bright Kamma versus neither bright nor dark. Because to me, right action, right view, right mindfulness seems bright. And the path seems to be bright action. So I need a little more clarification about that.
Yeah, this Majjhima Nikaya 117 really is a useful one in this. So the word for bright action resulting in accumulation is how the Buddha puts it, is punya. And it means merit. And it means happiness. The Buddha says, do not underestimate punya, boon in Thai. Merit is happiness. And, often this is like giving and, with the intention of getting something back from it. And often you will receive something back from it. People will know you're generous. And the path is one both of cultivating that bright karma and at the same time taking, Bhante Gunaratana says, what transforms that into path Kamma is you undertake each of those actions with the intention, nibbana pacchayo homi, asavakaya pacchayo homi. Asavakaya homi? Yeah. So may I develop towards nibbana, and may I give up the defilements, which is appropriate attention. So you're right, like it's a strong Venn diagram, and sometimes they can be perfectly aligned, but it's the difference between me giving a cookie to Ajahn Kovilo, knowing that he's kind of owes me a cookie tomorrow, maybe, versus, I should try to give you a piece of tofu today. Yeah, it wasn't, anyways. But it's the difference between that and giving it with the intention of like, I'm doing this as a factor of the path, as a chance to give up self, and let go. So similar, it's a good question, yeah.
It was a good piece of tofu. It wasn't just like a little tiny one. Yeah, I was content. We can shift into the latter part of our Saturdays, where we kind of extend the heart and open the heart up to include others who aren't necessarily here.